Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I've just been looking at spreadsheets for the last 10 hours, so you all look like an Excel spreadsheet to me. Well, thank you for coming to welcome you to our fourth town hall meeting on the City Hall project. We're going to kind of run through slideshow for you to kind of let you know where we're at, where we hope to go. And then we wanted to have an opportunity for all of you to ask questions of our design and construction team. So we've got Jason Stegner from Cove Built is here today. Chris Keene from Bearing Architecture, our architect, and Jesse Steiger, who is our owner's representative. I think Josh, you're going to queue up the presentation.
Yes, hang on. I got to share it.
Thanks. Are y'all happy to see the sun today?
And hail and rain and then some.
We got like an inch of hail at our house earlier today. Okay. So we're also live streaming this. So for folks that are out there, when we take questions, we'll take questions from folks who are on Zoom. So we have a live stream and then a Zoom. So if you're on the live stream and you want to ask a question, the Zoom link is on the city's website, and you can go there and submit a question either by raising your hand, and we'll call on you. But we'll go through the live audience first, and then we'll open it up to the folks on Zoom, and then you go from there. Did you hit the next slide?
Gary.
Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to Chris.
Sure. So I'm just going to start with a recap of what we're going to do today. We're going to start by kind of sharing with you, if you haven't already heard, the recent direction that we've received from City Council about the project. I'm going to do a very quick recap of the concept design that we've developed to date. I think Jesse is going to do a project budget recap and share some numbers with you. I think all this has been shared in different ways at City Council before, but we're trying to make sure everybody has all the information. Part of that will be a conversation about project financing moving forward. Should we get the green light to move forward? And then I'm going to talk at the end for a little bit about what our process is going to be for designing this facility if we get the go ahead to start the next phase. We've done a certain amount of work and we have some images that you've seen already, but really I just want to kind of impress upon everybody what it looks like to go through this design process and kind of where we are in that process, which is still very much in the beginning. And then, as Leila said, we're going to finish up with just some Q&A and conversation, and hopefully we can answer any questions you guys have. Next slide, please.
So,
Quick show of hands. Is this anybody's first public meeting on the city hall? Okay. I apologize. I think I should have added a slide that recapped what we've covered in the other public meetings. I didn't. I want to just go over real quick some of the process we've been through. So I'm going to talk for a second and then I'll get to the content of the slide. So we first met back in August, I believe, and that was really an introduction to the team. And we talked about some of the old process that the City Hall had been through years previous. And then really we just sat down with people and asked, what do you want out of this project? How can we build your trust? And what do you need to hear from this team so that you feel comfortable with this moving forward? Then we came back to another town hall meeting in October, I think. And Chris had a couple of different concepts for the facility design. One was a new construction option. One largely kept the school intact on site and was a renovation of the school. And then there was a third option that kind of left the Quonset hut intact and showed a renovation of that. And we just kind of dissected those options. What did you like? What do you not like? And really, in general, the overwhelming response was, we don't know without numbers because the budget really matters. In the third meeting, we came back in November. We'd just gotten Jason, our contractor, on board. He'd been on board for a week. And so it wasn't enough time to actually bring you any cost estimates at that time. But what we did do is we covered some of the technical engineering reports we received. And really, we had just received the geotechnical engineering report with some very critical foundation information that meant the whole police station has to have a really specific type of deep foundation system for the soil profile here. We also covered in detail and showed a bunch of pictures about some of the challenges with renovating the school and about the idea that if we're trying to reuse it, we really have to deconstruct the whole thing first and then rebuild it, which was coming at a greater expense. And so the question kind of at the end was understanding that to deconstruct these and rebuild is inherently more expensive. Do you still want us to keep pursuing renovation options, or can we shift to a new construction option? We didn't really take a vote, but by a show of hands, it was a majority that new construction was preferred. An online poll showed an 85% preference to new construction. And then we went to City Council in January. We covered all of those presentations in depth. It was like a 2.5 hour meeting or so. It was pretty long. We covered all of it. Jason did have a cost estimate at that time. And then we get to the slide, which is, sorry, now I'm just getting to this content. Then at the February 15th council session, we got direction that new construction option was the preferred way to go and received that direction. We also presented data and costs for a study. If we wanted to keep the Quonset hut as just a storage facility, here's what the cost would be. And City Council directed us at that time that we don't have the money for that and that we should go ahead and proceed with both demolition and abatement of the school and the Quonset hut. And we're working on a design for a new construction of City Hall. That's a lot of recap. That's what we got. You have any follow-up on that?
No, I think
Okay.
that's.
Next slide, please.
So in order for Jason to give us a number that we're working with, we had to do kind of a concept design, right? And based on the feedback that we got along the way, the process, the preferred location for the building is kind of in the southeast corner of the site. We're trying to keep it compact and simple. We're going to limit the site work, everything we can do to keep from running long utilities or pouring a lot of concrete for driveways is going to save us money. But even beyond that, there's a real feeling that we want to preserve as much of this site for future development and other purposes as possible moving forward. So for the purpose of getting ourselves to a real number that we can hang our hat on, we started to develop some drawings like this site plan here and the next slide. And then it also had to look like something, right? And the feedback that we've been getting throughout, keep it simple, natural materials. It wants to be of this place, wants to be welcoming, and of course it needs to be durable. So we developed this, what we're calling our kind of concept design, got some drawings to Jason, and he was able to take those drawings and do real takeoffs, talk to real subcontractors, get real numbers, and build his budget, which is the budget that I think has been shared publicly, but we'll share with you again tonight. But for our purposes, if we get the green light to move forward, that budget now sets our parameters, right? And as we start to develop this design, that number is going to be sacred, and we're going to keep coming back to it. And Jason's going to keep us from diverging from it. And there'll be other estimates along the way to make sure we stick to that. But this is kind of our starting point. And I'll talk a little bit after we talk about the numbers about where we go from here in terms of a design process. Next slide, please.
Oh, wait, go back one, please. You ruined my big reveal.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. So I do want to remind you, this is a slide we covered in the second public meeting, and it's really, what are all the parts and pieces of a budget? Because the terminology can get confusing. It gets confused in news articles. It gets confused when people talk about it. So there's a lot of different parts of a budget. This is on the city website. It'll be in this presentation as well. And so it tells you all the names of the parts and pieces of the budget and a description of what it is. I'm not going to go over in this detail because we're going to go right into the numbers. Now we can do the big reveal.
Okay.
Yes, here we go. The total project budget for this building is $5.8 million. Technically, it's $5,794,490. I hope you'll forgive me if I speak simply and I'm going to round up to 5.8. as I'd like to do with all of the numbers, so it's a little simpler. So I want to tell you what that is made up of. I'm just going to stand in front of the slide awkwardly. So I'm going to go back here. This number right here is $3.5 million. If Jason could put a shovel in the dirt tomorrow and start building, that is our estimate of what the hard construction costs are. The labor, materials, and the management costs to build the facility. But we can't build it tomorrow because we don't have a design and we don't have money and the project isn't approved yet. So we've estimated forward what we think inflation is going to do for when we can start building, which we're hoping to start in the winter, which is the most fun time to build, but Jason's good at it, like in January. So that adds about $150,000. That means $3.6 million is our hard construction costs at the point in time when he can actually start building. Then we usually keep a design contingency, but as this is a relatively simple facility, these guys have been talking, have been meeting. We collectively decided that we don't think we need that and we can work within this budget without an extra buffer. So we don't have this buffer in this project. Then there's a construction contingency, and that is $160,000. That allows Jason to be a little bit nimble during construction. Maybe it rains a little bit more than he thought, and he needs to pay people some overtime. It allows us to make little decisions kind of in the field and adjust to field conditions and to some unknowns. And that is something that we work through in construction. There are checks and balances to using this number or using this amount of money. Anything he doesn't end up using as part of the project goes right back to the city. Okay. So that means when we get to his total contract in January would be $3.76 million. That's what we call the GMP, gross maximum price or guaranteed maximum price. It's called both things, but that is the amount of the construction contract. Then there's an amount called soft costs, $1.3 million. It's kind of weird terminology. I don't know the origin of it, to be honest, but really what it is everything else that it takes to do this job besides the construction contract. It's design fees, it's project management fees, it's geotechnical engineering. And I have a whole next slide or 2 slides from now. We have all of the costs and we can talk about those in some more detail, but it's everything else to build the job. That means the subtotal for everything is $5 million. And then we are going to keep a contingency, and that is $750,000. It is 15% of the subtotal. That allows the whole project to be nimble. The whole design is based on a lot of assumptions. We know a lot of things. We have data to inform it, but we also have to make educated guesses on things. That $750,000 allows us to adjust to those guesses and move some money around within the project as we go along. Let's say a new law comes out and the police have to keep evidence now for 10 years instead of 5 years or something. I'm making this up. And we need 100 more square feet. Maybe we don't want to steal 100 square feet from council chambers. Maybe we want to increase the building just a little bit to account for that. And we decide to spend contingency on it. It can be used in a variety of ways, but it's there to support the project so that we can work within $5.8 million and never go back to city council and say we ran out of money. So the idea is that we have 750 of contingency here and 160 of contingency here. Any amount of those dollars that are unused go back to the city and are never spent. Okay, let's do the next slide, please. This is the detailed construction estimate. Yes, let's let Jason do it. He knows all of the numbers. You know them.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back. So when we go through a project like this, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? Ideally, I'd have 300 pages of drawings and I would send them out to bid and I would get 4 bids from everybody. We compile the best numbers, we'd put together the lowest cost. But when you do a project in this fashion, you start with about 3 pages. And we're tasked with trying to come up with that number. And so That's where many years of experience, lots of discussions with the architects, but more importantly, lots of discussions with the subs and partners around the community. So when we got to this point and Chris and his team gave me a set of drawings, I would start by asking Chris very specific questions. What are we thinking for siding? What are we thinking for roofing? What are we thinking for flooring? Here's my thoughts on how the structure is going to go. Chris calls his structural engineer and goes, does this sound like the right thing to do for structure? So we're taking a whole bunch of assumptions to try to get to a number. Very educated. Lots of thought goes into this, but I then go out and find as many local partners that can provide very honest, discrete input on this budget. So I went to a concrete sub, I went to an earthwork sub, I went to electrical, mechanical, plumbing. Those are the big ones. Those are the guys that usually have a lot of variance. And it's also scopes that are hard without their knowledge for me to estimate. So then I take their input and I start applying educated, practiced unit costs. For instance, siding, if we know that it's going to be cedar and it's going to be lopsided or shingled, I know pretty well what that's going to cost under prevailing wages. Roofing, same story. Flooring, Chris and I talk about what we're thinking for flooring. Talk to some, again, trusted partners to talk about square footage numbers. When we bring all those numbers together, try to cover all the loose ends and put it into this kind of master budget. Jesse talked a lot about contingency. Some of those contingency items, escalation items that we talked about are kind of pre-thought out so that as we get closer and closer to a real set of drawings, those numbers kind of fluctuate. In my experience, if we've done good hard work here with the appropriate contingencies, we can always nail it. And, you know, costs are going to continue to go up, right? We know that cost of glass is my favorite example because it just seems to never stop. Is going up, or we're using some of those escalation dollars to kind of buffer that out. You know, as we get closer and closer to what Jesse called the GMP, guaranteed maximum price, there might be compromises. We might have to say, well, we're going to put a little less glass in this building because we've exceeded the budget. We obviously have to put flooring in the budget. So we're making team-wide, city-wide decisions to come up with how do we then fit it into the model. This took me about a month to put together, a lot of conversations with subs. I realized how important it is to start with that number and try to continue to kind of peck our way towards a real buildable project. And I feel good confidence that with the rough size of building that we have, with the rough materiality that we have, some of the finishes that we discussed, the parking lots, we're going to get there. And the next part's the fun part. We get to, as Chris will talk about soon, talk about various design options and how we're going to make this a building that you guys are proud of. I'm super excited to bring tons of local subs, guys that are living down the street, to build this thing. The word is out there. People are getting excited about being a part of this project. I think that's a really important part of these community projects. My goal is to bring as many of these local entities and businesses to the table. Hopefully have local carpenters building it. That's who you want building it. These guys, we have to build in this lovely environment every day. And I've got tremendous respect and trust in the local community to build the right thing that will sit on the beach and last for another 80 years.
I just want to add to what Jason was talking about in terms of the process. One of the great things about having a CMGC on board, and Jason in particular on board, is we spent the last several months developing a relationship together along with Layla and Jesse. And, you know, oftentimes we're designing projects a little bit in the dark, right? Until we get that first cost estimate or we get that first bid. Jason's going to be in my ear real time as we're making decisions. So it should kind of shorten the distance between us and what we know something is going to cost. And then, of course, we'll have other opportunities during the design process to kind of do another full estimate and really take a very close look at it. But often when we're working kind of without a CMGC, we're making our best guesses, but our best guesses about these numbers are never as good as his best guesses. So it's really helpful for me to make sure we're not going down any bad roads and wasting time.
One more point, and I think this is an important one. That is, ToBuilt was elected on a competitive basis, but that was an RFP basis to be your general contractor. I'm super thankful and super excited to build for you. But the next step is we're going to go through at least another kind of midline estimate that will, again, help us get a little closer with more detail. And at the end of the day, I will be putting this out to all these trade partners on a public bid. So that's one of the kind of techniques with the CMGC is you get your contractor on board. We've got a defined fee. We know what some of the general conditions are going to cost. And then I'll be putting it out publicly in the paper, DJC, anybody can bid on it. So it's not like we're going to go directly to Diamond Heating to do the mechanical. I hope they do the mechanical. I hope they're at least bidding on it because I know I can trust on them. But it will be out there for the world. I will see bids from Portland. I'll see bids from Salem. In some cases, I'll see bids from Seattle for this job. And we're getting into that kind of bid climb. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that this will be a competitive process. And I believe that we're going to get the best price from a market basis that we can for this job. Does that make sense? I think it's a good clarifier to just understand that we're still going to be out there pushing this job and trying to get lots of input on it, especially Preston's.
So that was the hard costs. All of the construction costs, hard costs. These are all the soft costs. Soft costs, again, all of the other consulting fees. This is all fully transparent. The architectural design is usually the biggest chunk after construction. Chris, it's not just him, one person. It's a huge team of people. Yes.
Yes, can you tell me your readable, reading the barcode is just also.
Pull the blinds down. Would that help?
Yeah, you just can't see it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Are we just going to lights?
What's that?
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, Chris has to bring a whole team of people on. He needs a structural engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical, low voltage, civil, landscape. It is a wide range of sub-consultants under his contract that are producing the whole design. It also includes our fees to date. So we've been working on this project for almost a year now, actually. Our company's been on longer. Some of the other large ones we have pulled out. This says hazardous materials. It's really the abatement cost. So we're going to do that separately. So that is the abatement for both the school and the Quonset hut. There's this other one. It's called furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So this one, these are budgets. We barely have a floor plan. Like we have a concept of a floor plan. We haven't figured out furniture yet. What we do have are some estimates from other projects. What's a usual per square foot cost for furniture? Also in here are things like audio-visual equipment. We know the council chambers needs an ability to do video conferencing and live streaming these days. We don't know what that system might be yet, but there's a budget in here for that. These are all things that we still have to discuss with the city, work through all the details. And you know what? If we're able to reuse half the furniture at City Hall and use this equipment that you already have for video conferencing, then this is going to go down a lot and we're never going to spend that money. We do need to hold that budget though, because we haven't had a chance to define that yet. Trying to think if there's other things in there besides, it's generally furniture and audiovisual. There could be a couple other small things that are part of that as well. Other big ones. We had to have a geotechnical engineer. So they came out, I mean, they did a whole 30-page report. They had a drill rig out here. And that is a necessary consulting company to have on board. We have we have to buy a specific insurance policy to cover this building and this project while it's under construction. It has different types of risks. It's not a usual type of property insurance. It is a temporary form of insurance and they are not cheap. We had some legal fees to review all the contracts. We still have to pay building permit fees, even though this is the city. It is not waived. So you'd think there could be a magic wand for that, city council. I'm kidding. It's important. And so we have all these different soft costs. A lot of these are simply budgets for things because they haven't even been started yet. And so again, it's like some of the estimating. We know what they are from other projects. We know they're probably needed. Some of them might not be, but we want to keep them here as a budget so that we can deliver a whole project and not come back to city council and tell you we're out of money. That is a fail, and that's not what we're going to do. And then we show the contingency down here. Again, that was 15%. That is a pretty normal amount of a percent of contingency to carry at this level of design. And then over time, this might decrease. Like during the course of design, it's pretty common to say, oh, you know what? It looks like we could maybe afford some solar panels. Let's talk to people. Do we want to choose to spend some of that money on it? Yes or no? We can evaluate that. There's a lot of different ways to think about how to use the value that is in there, how to spend responsibly, what matters to the community and what the building needs. And so how all of this gets done is a lot of team discussions. None of it's done in isolation. And it's all documented, and there's lots of checks and balances throughout the entire process. That's what I have to say about that one. Next slide.
Okay. So we have sort of a decision tree here, which describes kind of what happens because we need to find space. In the end, we have to find space. So there really is a no answer. It's if no, then what? So phase 2, which City Council will be making in June, will determine what the next steps are. So if City Council elects to not proceed with phase 2, that's no, but we still have to demo and abate. As you know, we have the Q hut is cordoned off. It's got friable asbestos. It is a public health hazard and it needs to be taken care of. And so we will be hopefully budgeting for this fiscal year so that irregardless, that public safety hazard is taken out of the mix. Then we have to figure out an alternative solution. So if we decide not to move to phase 2, we got to figure out what we got to do next. If City Council elects to move forward, it would be my recommendation to the council at that time to kick off design. And that means getting Chris, Jason moving on design. So we're now at what they call 30% schematic design. There's sort of 3 phases to a development project. You have schematic design, which will go pretty quickly. You have a concept, general sort of locations of things, sort of suss those details out. And then we move into a phase called design development. Chris can talk about this more articulately than I can. That's where we start getting into the details. How is this wall designed? What are the features of this? All of that detail starts really getting worked in. Remember when I was working on the Letting Library, sitting down with the architect going, okay, I want a socket there and I want a socket there. And that's where we start to put those things in. Those transfer into a spec sheet that then Jason says, I need 27 light sockets. Those are going to cost X. So we start to get this higher level of detail in design development. And we'll probably do a cost estimate somewhere at 50% DD. Once we hit 100% design development, we move into a phase called construction documents. And that's where Chris, his team, structural engineers, they're detailing out everything down to like literally the screws and the nails. And then that ends up being the package that Jason will put out to the subcontractors to get a bid to build the project. So we start getting to like high level, a lot more detail, and then down to the nitty gritty. The spec sheets for the Letting Library, which was about a $9 million project, was that big. So you go from 3 pages to like 5,000, which is why we have Jessie, because she helps me understand all that. So council's decision then, if we go yes, we kick them off, we get into a funding decision. And so that's whether or not to go to a bond or a full faith and credit. And we also have a third option now, which I'll be talking about at the work session on May 12th. which is the Special Public Works Fund through the state of Oregon. It's a lower interest rate project. And so on the 12th, I anticipate showing council what the cost will be to take out a full faith and credit loan. So we'll be looking at the full cost, not only the loan itself to build the project, but what is the interest we're going to pay over the term of that loan. And I'll have options for all three. But the timeline for the full faith and credit and the special public works are the same. So if council elects to move to a bond, then we need to wait until November where this gets referred to the voters. So we will actually have to, by August, submit ballot language to the state, get that approved. That will go on the November ballot, and then that will determine whether or not the project moves forward or not. And again, we're going to be in the same situation here. If voters say no, we still demo and abate. We may already do this in the time frame between yes and abatement. Will probably happen this summer just because it's cheaper and better to do it during the dry season. But you're still going to have to figure out an alternative solution. If the voters say yes, then it takes us a couple months to get that debt issuance. So if you're familiar with the bond, we have to hire bond counsel. There's a lot of costs that go into issuing a bond. A lot of legal work that goes behind that. That debt gets issued, and then we start construction. If council elects to do a full faith and credit option or the Special Public Works Fund, it'll take us about 30 to 90 days to get debt. And then we can move to construction as soon as the construction documents are complete. So it's just a way of showing folks that there's a lot of options, but no means an alternative solution. And yes could mean a couple of different things. So it'll still TBD, but I expect by June, we'll have a much better sense of whether we enter into phase 2 and what instrument council would like to use to fund the project. I hate saying that. It seems so snarky. It's just PTSD from having been an assistant in someone next. So I just wanted to kind of highlight, I showed this at a previous council meeting. If council authorizes phase 2, they'll have to commit to roughly $450,000 because the city, we cannot enter into a contract. So we've set up both Chris's contract and Jesse's contract into 2 phases. We can't enter into that agreement until that's budgeted for in our city budget. So if council authorizes phase 2, the financial commitment is really those 2 contracts and then the demo and abatement piece of it, which we'll work with Jason on. Expect the approval of the city budget will happen in June. And the reason why I put that out there is part of the reason why I'm blind is I'm working on projections right now. Something the city, I did a rudimentary version last year, doing a real version this year of what does our financial picture look like over the next 5 years, which is really the only horizon you should look at. Folks have asked me, why don't you do 30 years? Because it's not really helpful. You don't really know what's going to happen in 30 years, but you certainly can start to understand what your financial picture looks like with a 5-year projection. And I've consulted with a number of financial experts, and that's the guidance that we get. The state does 2-year projections. So that will be information that's critical for the city council to determine whether or not they feel that there's enough room in our budget to handle a debt service payment. So once that decision is made, my hope is the city council will also be able to make a decision on the financing option. So that will also have a lot to do with the 3 options that I'll be presenting in May. Because there is big differences between interest rates and loan terms, and those things matter over the life of the project. And then finally, the next commitment that is made is the GMP. So at the time that we get the final cost estimate, we will amend the contract that we have with Jason. And that's when we're committed to that resource. So we kind of need council to figure out which way are we going to go and how are we going to fund it. And then once we know whether or not we're getting the funding, then we can start to move forward with that commitment. I just think it's important to understand that when council makes the decision in June, they're not committing to that $5 million right at that moment. But in effect, we are committing to the project. We just don't technically make that commitment until we draw down the debt and we amend Jason's contract with the GMP, call it a GMP amendment. One thing I do want to note too, because we get a lot of feedback on construction costs and what things cost. We had to operate under what they call the Bureau of Labor and Industries. So that's prevailing wage, which is, Jason, 20% more
Well, it's just labor and.
labor.
In many cases, it's 50%. It's double the cost of, for instance, the prevailing wage for a carpenter is about $65 an hour today. It changes every 6 months. And I'd say average wage of carpenters in the area is $30 an hour or something like that.
So if you're hearing numbers that sound like, oh, it's so much cheaper, it's likely that they're not accounting for the fact that labor is not at prevailing wage. And that's a requirement by state and federal law we have to follow. So public projects tend to be more expensive because of that. And the intent and purpose of it is derived from the Davis-Bacon rules, which were established by the federal government to ensure fair competition between contractors. So I just think it's really important to understand there's a lot of numbers out there. These numbers are the real numbers, and they reflect the actual reality of what it means to build a public facility. Next. Now he'll talk about the design timeline.
Yeah, which you've already actually covered pretty well, so I won't belabor this. I wanted to just kind of zoom in on that, mostly to make the point of kind of where we are in the design process. You know, it's very easy these days for us to generate images that look like complete buildings because of the tools we use. But it's pretty, you know, a lot of that is kind of mirage, right? We've given Jason the tools he needs to get some good pricing. He's set some parameters for us. And if we get the go ahead, we're going to really get into this and start designing within those parameters. So way over on the left here, where that star is kind of where we are in this design process. And if we use this middle line here, so we're calling just the design phase, made up of the three parts that Layla referenced, we're assuming if we were told tomorrow to move forward, we're probably 6 months, give or take, from getting to a full set of documents. Now, importantly, we want to have some time built into this thing for Jason's second estimate, whether that happens at the end of design development or in the middle of it. I think that's still TBD. But we need to do that in case his estimate comes back and we realize, oh God, we got to take 10% out of this budget because we've somehow gone beyond it. So we built time for VE, value engineering, term of how we make things get back on budget, essentially. And sometimes there's some hard decisions. Sometimes we dip into the contingency. Sometimes we defer something, right? It's a conversation at that moment. And it's essentially a series of value judgments. Once we get to that, we'll get to the GMP. Jason will get under contract. We'll get under permit, and we'll be off to the races. We'll stay involved during construction to oversee that construction, answer questions, and troubleshoot. So that's what's coming should we be given the green light. And if you can go to the next slide, for us, you know, that's when we really get rolling. Our firm gets rolling. We start really getting into all of the things that Layla talked about. But in addition to the guidelines and the parameters that Jason's given us with that number now, we're always going to be going back to these very first things that we were given when we first started talking to you all. The community goals that were established, value, durability, functional, resilient, of the place, sustainable. Next slide, please. And these themes, right? Reflect the values of the community, create an inspiring workplace, provide friendly, efficient customer service, and embrace innovation. These are, you know, part of the guideposts that we set ourselves as we move through the process. And then there was all this information and feedback we heard during these workshops along the way. Again, there were many things, but in terms of the building itself, keep it simple, natural materials, be of this place. A lot of people reference the bank and the library buildings. We want space for community meetings. We want it to be flexible and welcoming. So that, coupled with the information that Jason has provided us now, that will be the framework within which we are working to design this facility. Next slide, please. This is essentially the material palette that we've been pricing so far. Simple cedar shingles, cedar siding, a metal roof, landscape. We're not going to propose some, material out of left field. We want this kind of simple of the place like a lot of the rest of the buildings around here. And we think that's can be really beautiful. But we're going to study this some more, and this thing is going to start to evolve and reshape as we start to get some of this other information in. Information from structural engineers, information from our mechanical engineers, how we think about sustainability, and of course, budgeting. So we're going to go through a series of massing studies that have to do with aesthetics, but they also have to do about how we tune the building to this environment. We'll do the same thing with the site. We have a diagram for this site, but there's a lot of question marks still. So, we're going to talk about parking in real depth. We're going to talk about how do we establish the boundaries of this project on the site. If you're familiar with the site, there's no curb, there's no edge to the street. Are we going to take an edge all the way around this entire site with this project, or are we going to limit that? If we're going to limit it, how are we going to do it? So there's a lot of kind of questions and design decisions that we're going to make along the way. And then, as Layla said, we're going to get into the technical development. We're building on the coast in a really difficult, hostile marine environment. This building needs to last. We need to detail it so it will last. We need to use the right materials so that it will last. So durability, high performance, always a balance, right, between cost and longevity. Some of the things that are best to build with out here are the most expensive materials you can imagine, right? We're gonna prioritize where we know they need to be prioritized, and we're gonna look for simpler solutions in other places. One last thing on that. One way we do that also is we always involve the people who are taking care of the buildings. The last thing we want to do is deliver a building that is impossible to care for, or the people that have to care for it are frustrated with constantly. So we like to involve them in the process as well. Next slide, please. And then sustainability. We really haven't talked about this at great length, except that it's a goal, right? One of the great things about being in a coastal environment is there's a lot of really simple kind of low-hanging fruit that we can get to, right? A really good envelope and a really high efficiency air source heat pump can go a long way to really keeping energy costs down, right? We're going to do new lighting that's all LED and efficient. We're going to work on, selecting fixtures and plumbing fixtures that are really, water, high efficiency fixtures. So there's all of that world that we're going to start with, kind of basic assumption. And then, as Jesse mentioned, there's where else can we go with this budget that we have? And sometimes we can't go all the way we want to go, but we certainly can design a building that could accept photovoltaics if we can't afford them today, right? So we're going to be anticipating how this building can kind of evolve in a sustainability approach as well. And then finally, one of the we haven't really talked about much, or I haven't, is accessibility. Your current city hall is not an accessible space, right? That seems kind of unacceptable for a town. So we're gonna get the building is going to be fully accessible. It's going to, of course, meet all the ADA laws, but I think we're also going to kind of conceive of it as being as kind of universally accessible as possible, and that'll have to do with how we think about the site, we think about the furniture, in addition to all of the things that the code is going to make us do, like, make bathrooms that are wheelchair accessible and make door hinges or door latches that are usable for people of different abilities. So we're kind of excited for Manzanita to have a public facility that really is inclusive in that way. So that's kind of a list. I haven't even talked about the interior of the building. We're going to get into that at great length with both the police department and with Layla's staff, how things lay out exactly. But that's there's a lot for us to do moving forward. And we're going to we're really excited to jump to that, but always with the understanding that we've got some North Stars here. One of them is budget, and the other is those kind of community values and themes that were given to us from the very beginning. So that's kind of what we have to share with you today. I think we wanted to just open it up to questions, right, for any or all of us about any of these subjects.
Yeah, and just would ask if you have a question, maybe you can come up to the front if you're able. Just one at a time.
Yeah, that's great.
Do I have to come up to the-
No, Leila.
It's a two-part question, I think it's Jason said. With an emphasis on competitive local bidding, are you bound to take the lowest bid?
It's a good question.
And the other part of that question is, with, I can't remember, but the pay
Prevailing wages.
prevailing wage, for those local people who don't always work at prevailing wage, will they be paid for it?
Start with that. So yes, Boley and possibly Davis-Bacon. Boley is the state regulatory agency that mandates prevailing wages, and Davis-Bacon is the federal. I believe will be under the Boley wages here. Without a doubt, we are state mandated to pay every worker that works on this job site a prevailing wage defined by the state of Oregon. That's different for a laborer, a carpenter, electrician, you name it. And on Boley's website, all those wages are listed. That wage rate is defined by the date that we bid the project. So in all likelihood, we'll be bidding the project in December, which will lead us to a June or July wage determination. Not only me, but every sub on the job site has to pay those wage rates. When I get invoices from those subs on a monthly basis, they will also send me certified payroll, which shows every person's name and the wage rate that they were paid. That goes into a file. It's at the city's discretion to see it, but it's contractually obligated for me to maintain that wage rate and make sure that people are doing what they said they're going to do. Does that make sense?
I'm also usually expected to spot check that. I've literally walked around job sites before and I find Joe Smith and I said, this says you were paid, $27 an hour. Is that what you actually get? And so there's a checks and balances to that where that we're supposed to do as well. So
I could be audited at any day by a Boley inspector as well. So there are Boley inspectors running around the state of Oregon going to public jobs, and they like to go and, without my knowledge, go speak with an electrician and say, what are you getting paid on this job? So we should be ethical, right? That's the way this works. Your prior question was about low bid, and for the most part, yes. But I'll say this much. Every bid has to be proofed, and it has to be a responsible low bid. So that puts a lot of pressure on me and my team to make sure that if I get a bid out of Camas, Washington, they have all the scope covered. They're carrying prevailing wages. So we do a lot of work when we get bids in the door. So I'll put a bid date out there of, say, December 15th, and it'll take me a good couple of weeks to kind of parse through the bids and make sure that whatever bids we have are responsible low bids. There have been many cases in my years of doing this where somebody's low, but they missed 2 or 3 scopes of work and I have to throw it out. So it goes to this guy. I will be encouraging strongly for all those in the neighborhood up and down from, I like to say, Tillamook to Astoria, to get engaged, and I'll be making those calls. Please bid this job. This is a great job. It's our local community. Most of our local subcontractors love these kind of jobs. For one, their guys are making excellent wages and they're working on a great team. There's that too.
You want to do the microphone bit?
It's a little hard, isn't it?
But see if the people online can hear, if they're on the microphone. That's the question.
We'll try and repeat the questions. How about, you, the green vest first, yeah. But
What is the owner's representative?
what is the owner's representative is the question. Well, that is myself. So I manage the project. So I put together the procurement for the architectural contract, which is a RFP. We do the selection, same thing for the contractor. I manage the budget. And on those soft costs, we had the whole page filled. I manage all of those contracts. So I find the right consultants, the right teams. I manage those contracts and I manage the budget. And I work for the city. My job is to advise the city on, yes, this is good, or maybe Jason gives us some numbers and they seem ridiculous. I also review them and I'm like, this is not a good number. We need to push back. My job is to advise the city, manage the budget, and help you manage risk and give you good advice. If an entity doesn't necessarily have like in-house expertise to help manage a construction project.
And I would add, maybe you could talk a little bit about owners' representatives have specific construction background and expertise. And so every public project I've worked on, the owner's rep has saved the city as much money, if not more, than the contract that we pay them. So a really good example of how an owner's rep adds just significant value is we're talking about the value engineering. So I worked on a project that we got the bid in, it was $1 million over our budget. And we had to make some tough choices. And I was presented with, okay, well, we can use party panel or metal or this. And I'm like, I know enough to know a little, but I don't really understand the difference between those things. My owner's rep would evaluate that, would go and negotiate with these guys, and then would come back to me and say, okay, because Jessie is expert, she has experience in doing this. I have enough to be dangerous, but you don't want someone being dangerous in charge of a big project. And so she will do that work for me. And then she comes to me and says, here are the options. Here's what I think. And this is what next step is. Now I can say, I don't like that option. I want to explore this. And we'll go back and forth. But that value is based on her in-depth experience, also an engineer who understands things at a much greater level than I do and can work with the team in a much deeper level. It's a full-time job to manage a construction project. I have a full-time job. I have like 5, actually. So this kind of resource is an invaluable and frankly necessary component of a construction project.
I think it might also just be, and this is maybe very apparent to everybody, but it's the way all of our contracts are set up. Jessie essentially, at least in the way I think of Jessie's role, she is the city. She works directly for the city. Even though we work as a team, we kind of have been presenting as a team of collaborators. We're not all paid by the same people, right? And this is part of the checks and balances that you see up here, right? I report essentially to Jessie and Layla. Jason reports directly to them. We don't have a contract together. So this is set up for the city to have as much expertise and as much risk protection as possible. If I get out of line, Jessie's going to beat me up, right? If Jason gets out of line, Jessie's going to beat Jason up. Right?
I beat people up for a living. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all you do.
But Jessie is essentially your advocate, even though we like to think of ourselves as your advocate as well. But contractually
Speaking.
that's, I think, a distinction worth making.
Yeah. Next question. Yes.
Got 2 questions. The first one is, with the word abatement, does that include all of the existing buildings on the site, the school and the hospital?
Yes, the budget we're carrying for abatement is including both the school and the Quonset hut.
But that does not include the final demolition of those buildings. So we're also carrying those costs as well. So we can't touch it. Nobody on my team can touch that building until a professional abatement, certified abatement company comes in, takes all hazardous materials off that job site and transports them to a facility in Hillsborough. Once that is cleared, then they say, Jason, tear it down. And I bring in Longfellow, Erickson, one of those guys, and we'll tear it to the ground.
Okay. The second question, is there any, I didn't see anything in the budget regarding installation solar power. Does that field out there, the property, to me, and I'm no expert, but it seems it lends itself well to a solar panel field, you know, to produce electricity in the building. Is that anywhere in the thinking of the
I think we have to study it. Solar is expensive. So one of the things we were just talking about is how some of those massing studies that Chris showed you and the slope of the roof, some of them are already set up really optimally for solar. And that it has to be something we studied. This is not something we've looked at yet. It's not a distinct goal of this project. It's also not currently in the budget. So we can study it. And if at the end of the day, we want it, but we simply cannot afford panels, one of the things we can do is design the roof to make sure that we've designed it smartly with the right details so that adding it is as cheap and easy as possible and still leaves a really solid roof. So it's a great question. It's something we still have to.
And I think there's another component there, and that is we've got this pretty sizable contingency, right? And that the first use of that contingency are for the things that crop up that surprise us. It happens all the time, right? We'll do our best to design the building, and I'll do my best to price the building. And every now and then something comes up where we didn't see that thing and it costs some money. We pull some contingency. As a project continues closer and closer to completion, that contingency, I might be speaking for you, becomes potentially available for what I like to call buyback items into the project. We want to put as much of the city's dollars into the project that we can to add value. And so I'm guessing that as we go through the project, we'll be looking at, okay, there are $500,000 worth of things that didn't make the budget that we'd like to get in the project. And if the team, mostly the city, chooses that we can pull those into the project with that contingency, then that's the best use of those dollars at the end of the day.
You know, or it's
Value to the project.
or at the very least, we design it so that, like you said, not only can the roof carry it, but we've got the conduits in place and we've got, you know, a place for storage, you know, so that's that design process. We're going to grapple with as many of those things as possible because we'd all love to make this thing as sustainable as possible. To your point, it's a perfect site for solar. I think we haven't studied that with our engineers, but it looks great. So we're going to push that. And then Jesse will tell us yes or no and keep me in line and keep us all in line.
Thank you.
Yes.
So what I didn't see in your presentation, it was a very good presentation, is the total square footage between the administration and the police.
Yes, we have that. And now I'm blanking on it precisely. The building is just about 6,000 square feet total. That includes about 1,200 square feet of council chambers. And then the police and office is pretty close to evenly split between that. So it's about 2,000 square feet of on either side, circulation, and then.
So just a clarification. So between the administration and the police, 6,000 square feet?
No, the whole building is about 6,000 square feet. Administration is roughly 2,000, police is roughly 2,000. The council chambers is in the 12 to 1,500 square feet. And then there's the circulation and all the stuff, you know, in between.
Total 6,000.
Correct.
Of the building, yeah.
So because I can turn on my phone, what is that rough cost of square foot then when you take that into the roughly $6 million? Again, we're talking very rough numbers.
I haven't calculated that in so long.
Project budget or the
Total.
well, it's about 6,006,000 is what it is.
Hey, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot here. Details matter. Divided by 6,000, $966 per square foot, all in for all of the costs
With site work.
with site work
And
supplements and contingency and this and that. Yes.
And my only last comment, and it's not for the design team, it's more for the city council. With these kind of numbers, I hopefully you will recognize that we as the voters should have input and that I would like to have a chance to vote on this. So thank you.
One more question? Yeah.
Okay, so my question is going back to the funding, which we have not really gotten clear on. I'm wondering, in paying back, if the city gives a yes decision, what's the difference? Where does the funding come from with a bond versus the FFC loan? And who's responsible for the payments?
I mean, the source of revenue.
Yes.
Okay. So a bond, it's easy. It's property taxpayers. So you pay 100% full freight on your tax bill. If we do the special public works or the full faith and credit, it comes out of the general fund. And so whatever sources of revenue that support the general fund will be paying for that. The majority of which comes from the transient lodging tax, fees for service. And then a very small portion of that, 9%, comes from property taxes. So roughly 90% of it comes from other revenue sources that the city already gets. And about 9 to 10% of that would be coming from property taxes.
And does the city currently have the resources to repay this much money on the FFC?
Working on that.
I know, but it's not clear. It's not been made clear to me.
Because I don't have the information yet. As I said, I'll be coming back to City Council on March 12th. I've been working May 12th. Been working so hard with those figures. So one of the things I'm doing for the city for the first time ever is developing a very sophisticated projection model that estimates our revenue, estimates our expenditures, projects those out with all those costs included, including a potential debt service, so that City Council can be informed and make that decision.
But to go with Scott's comment about wanting to have a vote on it, that would be the bond option. Is that correct?
The bond option would have to go to a public vote. That's correct.
Thank you.
Where are the property costs in this? And do we already pay that?
So the project costs that we're showing are what it's going to take to finish the project. This has come up a lot, and I think there's some sense that we're trying to obfuscate the facts. We're not. We bought the land. It was $1.75 million. We have a 10-year note. We're in the process of paying that off. It'll be paid off by 2027. So the property costs are not included in this because we're already paying for that. And it's already we're committed and we have to pay for that. So what I've been saying from the start is what we're trying to get to is what is it going to take to finish this project? And so those are the budget costs. I've been very clear about that's what we're showing when we're talking about the 5.8 million. That's what it's going to take to get the project finished.
And are the parking lot, the lighting, all the exterior, that was one of those budget lines?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like you're only using about a quarter of the site for the project. So that would mean that related to the previous question, 3/4 of the site would theoretically be available for other uses.
That's right. Yeah.
That was one of the earlier studies we did. Chris had a diagram of the site showing, I don't know, let's plop in a block that's maybe future workforce housing or future storage, farmers market. There's a lot of ideas. They're not part of this project, but we did look at those just so people had some ideas.
Yeah, I'm on the board of directors of farmers market. That's specific.
Cool, you know.
Lighting there.
Yeah. So it's arguable, like how much of that cost to purchase the property actually relates to City Hall.
Right.
You know, we can certainly, those numbers are out there, but I don't know that they're relevant to us finishing the project. Because it's land that we own. It's the city's largest evacuation site. So it's strategically important for the city in terms of emergency management and safety for you and for the visitors. So the site serves way more purposes than just the corner of it. Whatever the 10,000 square feet of the 2.67 acres, which is roughly 100,000 square feet of a site. So it's taken up about 10%.
Which is one of the reasons to push it down in the corner and leave the rest of the site for whatever future uses the city, thinks adds value to the community.
Yeah, one of the things we did actually, which was feedback from one of the town halls, was there's right-of-way, Classic Street right-of-way adjacent to that property. And so the site plan that we currently have actually utilizes the right-of-way to access the site. So we're really trying to be efficient with the city's land and the resources. So there'll be kind of a double win there, is because we're actually going to create a road where there was not a road before.
Yes.
Yeah. I just would like to encourage everybody to think about sustainability in the disaster, all repower. That's why I think the solar option is really important. Either that or a lot of generators, which are very noisy and not fun. But really continue to think about that option for any money that's left over that can be reprogrammed the building so that it's available to use. So,
Online question, is that right? Oh,
One more, and then we'll go online, and if you have more questions. Okay.
Is there a leads requirement?
Yeah.
No, there's not a requirement. No.
in between what?
Well, we don't require it. Typically, in other jurisdictions I've worked in, when I was at the Portland Development Commission, you're required to meet a certain green standard. Chris can talk about it a little bit more, but there's typically extensive overhead costs associated with getting certification. When we're constrained by budget, that's a cost we just can't afford. One of the reasons that we hired Chris is because the philosophy of building sustainably. So he said things like building envelope. That's language, meaning we're trying to make this building so that it's efficient and we're not having to heat it up. It's the building envelope is actually, I think, one of the number one things you can do to ensure sustainability. So a lot of the principles, the design principles, we went through the interview process. One of our questions, just like talk to us about that. So when Chris was talking about the massing studies, it's not just, oh, how can we make this pretty? How do we maximize passive lighting, for example? So if we can have good daylight, I mean, it's kind of hard yeah, but that actually reduces overall costs, like operational costs go down because of that. So we'll be designing to that standard, but we won't be adding additional costs to the project just to get a gold bell plaque.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of our clients kind of grapple with these days. The cost of being certified is not insignificant. We try to tailor the approach at each project kind of to the place and to the kind of particular values, right? So, and to the budget, of course, right? So, I mean, out here on the coast, it's going to be a lot different what the things we're interested in than if we're in Central Oregon for obvious reasons, right? So we're going to look for all the stuff that we kind of have to do anyway and do it really well. And then we're going to design either to anticipate technology or to accept technology like PV's budget allowing. So we take it very seriously, as I'm trying to say that, and this is not to disparage LEED at all. It's a great program, but it does come with some costs, and we can, I think, achieve a lot of the same things without that.
And it's a lot of cost. It's not just like, oh, this is $100. No, this is at least $10,000, probably more like 20. It's a ton of paperwork for Jason to pursue. They charge you a lot. It's actually, they make it really difficult. And probably there's a checklist. I would imagine we're meeting LEED Silver without actually pursuing certification and spending all of that money already, because Chris is already going to design a pretty smart and efficient building to start with. But it's shockingly expensive. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
So I'm just doing the rough math here, but $20,000 divided by 6 million, pretty tiny number.
For LEED certification?
Yes.
Oh, it is a city directive. So if council, Layla, if the city said we want this, we can do it. But it comes at a cost. It could be more than that. I don't know what the cost is. I just know it's not a small cost, right? It's just there. So
almost $100,000 on an $8 million project I worked on just to do the certification. And along with that took the hiring of a number of consultants to do different engineering studies to look at before and after. So we had 4 different versions of the HVAC system, had 4 different versions of these systems. So it's something we can talk about, but given that the driving factor here has been cost, if we can build a building that meets that criteria and we don't get the sign, I think that that's in the best interest of the city in terms of the value that we're trying to get from the project. We had some online questions.
Yes.
And we can come back to folks if we missed you.
Yeah, first one is Pam. Pam, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There we go. Okay, nope, still showing you muted. Oh, there we go.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the presentation. A lot of good information. It's clear that a lot of work has been done. A lot of, information has been shared, and to some extent feels like I've heard some of the same things many times before, which is fine. I do have a question on the size. I looked at the building and it looked like, seemed small to me. And my question is this include all the city staff in there? And does it have any room for, growth, any additional staff members?
Well, you want to start that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't include all of us. The public works won't be in this building. It'll be the city's administration. So it'll include myself, the county manager, the assistant city recorder. In our planning department, which is located at the water treatment facility right now. So that would be Scott Gephardt, our building official, development services manager. We have a planner, permit tech. And then we have our STR program manager. And that will include our police department, which is 4, plus our new code enforcement officer. So there'll be 11. There's room for, I think, 13 to 14 staff.
Yeah.
But it is what is essential, and nothing more.
Yeah, I guess usually when you build a new building, you try to build it to maybe 80% or 90% to leave yourself about 10, 15% expansion. And I don't know whether you have considered that at all, or whether you just think we'll add on another building to it, or either on one side, if in the future. I'm even thinking like the STR, you talked about and adding another inspector, half an inspector. So, there may be some things that come in the future and storage. And anyway, if you're fine with it, that's fine. I'm fine with it. I just don't want us to make a short-term decision and regret it later on. Second,
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Second question is on the council chambers. Is that a multi-use? Are there movable chairs in there so we can use for other things if we need to?
Yes, the concept for the council chamber is essentially a multi-purpose space. Of course, it'll want to have what it needs in terms of infrastructure to hold city council meetings, but we're going to make that room as flexible and multi-purpose as possible. And I think there's even some opportunities to use it, to have it open up to the rest of the site in ways that might make it a great venue for at different times of year to be used by the public. So yes, the intent is to make it flexible. We're going to provide enough storage in it to put chairs away, just like in the room we're sitting in now, and conceive of it really as a community living room kind of space.
Great, thank you. Well, I'd just like to end by saying that, I think, I guess I'll make my pitch. We've seen this a lot. I guess as a resident, homeowner, citizen of Manzanita, I'm ready to pay my fair share of the cost and move forward with this thing. I hope the council will move forward in some way, because we'll never get everything everyone wants. So somewhere along the way, we just have to make a decision and move forward. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, we'll take donations too if you want.
There's a line item.
Okay, there I am, Kirchner. Mark, you can unmute now, or you should be able to. There we go.
That's a good phone me.
Mark, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to echo Anupam a bit more on the we can afford to build what we can with the budget limitations. And as noted, if we're going to incur about $20,000 a month costs as the project is not being built, that comes to what, $250,000 annually. So I would, as a citizen, say, let's move ahead with all speed to get this project okayed, funded, and then into construction, because many of us are anxious to see it built and done. So for all of us, please build it like now. Thank you.
Come on, Jason, get to work.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, and we have one more, which is Linda Kushner. 1 second here.
Yeah.
Linda, can you unmute yourself?
Good evening, and thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Echoing, my main question for the team was that scalability is a big part of your plan, I hope, and that we can adapt to future needs and still accommodate the fact that that site is one of the primary evacuation areas for Manzanita. And just a comment is that I greatly appreciate the transparency, the way that you've communicated everything that you're working on in terms that most people can understand, and the way that you've really sought public input. And I greatly appreciate that. Personally, I would like to say that I do not want to see this go to a vote. I would prefer to not have to pay for all of this myself, and would hope that we could seek one of the other two options. But as far as the scalability question, I hope that that's being considered. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you know, in one of the slides I shared tonight was this discussion about our site plan diagram. We've already had some conversations about future storage on the site. But I think the building really needs to be designed to grow easily if that's what we need to potentially prepare for. So as we start to think about both the site plan and the building plan, that will definitely be one of the things in our mind moving forward.
I just said I do a lot of thinking about staff because it's my job, and my main job is to run the city and hire staff. And I could see that potentially in the next couple of years hiring one more person. I would love to hire like 5 because I have 5 jobs and I'd love to give away a few, but you know, you guys ask for a lot, but we do a lot for what we have. So the way that I budget and plan is based on what is the greatest value for the city. I have just a rock star team that does a lot. You know, I have folks that do 3 different jobs. It's not ideal, but it's a necessary thing. So what I project is potentially having someone who is working at the front counter and managing that front counter eventually. But at this point, we've made do. And I can't see that the city would need to hire substantially more staff unless we were able to generate substantially more revenue. So I also take a pretty strong philosophy, always done this before I was a city manager, when I was a department head, that when I hire people, I hire them for keeps. So I don't hire folks if I think I'm not going to be able to keep them on, like, and have that position exist forever. Because it's just kind of just a philosophy that I have, is that if we hire somebody, there's a job and there's a responsibility that goes on. Because when we work in a public entity like ours, there's costs associated with that, from healthcare to PERS to other things. So when we need short-term help or outside expertise, we hire that out on a contractual basis as needed. So, for example, I'd love to hire Josh full-time, but I actually don't have full-time work for Josh. And so we contract with Josh. He's part of our family and our team, but I can't justify a full-time position. So I'm as I look at the 5-year projections that I'll be presenting to council, I have worked that into kind of my estimates of what I think is necessary. So I feel like the building will be designed is what is absolutely necessary. We're not packed in like sardines, but we also don't get a whole lot of space.
You have a little wiggle room.
But we have more than we have now. So what we have now.
And it'll be better space that's more flexible so that if you do need to
Grow for a little while or for a long time, I think we'll be able to accommodate.
I think you can accommodate certainly 5, probably 10 years worth of growth in this building. And you can like refresh it, which would be great.
You had one question before I went. You're good? Okay. We answered it. Yes.
I'm just going to comment about, I'm so pleased to see you using more volunteers, like with organizing the July 4th parade. And there's so much talent here in our community. To pull that in is just makes you a rock star. And I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate
You had a
that.
question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you considered with your staff doing any like at-home work, cube sharing to help save on space. I assume they're doing some of that right now with the small space you have.
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of our staff, so our police, for example, they need independent space, but they're not always all there at the same time. The administrative staff, we do that. And if that becomes like, if we do have a space issue, we are set up so we can all work remotely now, which has been great when we've had, we had a few days last year where we had to close city offices because of snow, but we actually all still were able to work from home. So, and it's a great point. I'm a big fan of that kind of flexibility. The main thing for us is that, one of the service goals that I have for us is we've reopened City Hall for walk-up service in the mornings. I would like us to be able to have City Hall open every day, something there at least 30 days. And we just can't do that right now because of the way we're set up. But I'm a big proponent of that. And I think that could certainly be a solution. We're all moving to laptops as well, so that we can, if needed, a hot desk if we need to.
I was gonna say that's one of like the furniture solutions we want to investigate is what could we order now? Like maybe everybody has their own desk now, but how could they be flexible in the future? How does that work with technology? It's some of the stuff it's a really nice part of the design process to work through those ideas together and plan for that type of flexibility.
We're totally remembering that. She keeps telling, keep the number, but
Like just keep the number.
we have some nice desks. In fact, police chief just bought some desks for his like falling. But those are great desks. We'll be taking this over.
Maybe you already covered this in previous meetings, but I've missed it. What is the seating capacity of the meeting room?
We're designing it for 75, and how that gets described by code, there's a number of square feet per people, right, for the room. So, but the intent is to be able to house 75 people at a council.
You'll have people who can attend meetings by Zoom, I assume?
Yes,
We're
that's
required
that.
by law.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and that.
It works great. We want
Yeah, and I think the AV number that Jesse's carrying, we brought up earlier. I mean, that could be a very expensive system. I don't think it's going to be in this case, but it's going to be probably dialed in a little bit better so it doesn't have to be set up like this every time you have a meeting.
Well, and mad props to Josh.
Yeah. I didn't mean that as a.
Look at all these little puck things. Like, what are they all?
Actually, part of the discussion has been, Josh is great about helping to give you some props here, helping us do this in a value-oriented way that's super high quality. So a lot of these materials will work with Josh actually when we start talking about the technology to get us to a more precise number. So that 170 is going to go down. It's certainly going to go down. But like Jesse said, we want to give you that sticker shock so you can be like, oh my God. So that if for some reason inflation goes through the roof, you don't go over it. But our goal is to get under it.
Yeah.
What is the inflation rate you used?
6%, about 6% annually.
The escalation rate.
The escalation rate, yeah. And that's what one of the things I think one of the callers brought it up because I think I chimed in at one of the city council meetings is just you buy groceries, you understand inflation, stuff's going up. We can't control it. And so Jason's got to estimate stuff at a point in time. We have to give you a number for a point in time. And so we've assumed a January start. The bond would extend that out some. We try to control that. We're not magicians. We can't control the economy, right? So, and I tried to weigh in about kind of the cost of decision making. So I took the construction budget times 6%, and I think it was like about 18 to 20 grand a month is the cost of a delayed decision. And so like to try to have people think about that is time is money, and there's only so much we can do without being given the go ahead to keep taking our steps forward. So that's what we'd like to do is to continue to design it so that we can land on those numbers and not have time be our enemy. Because we can design buildings, we can't control time and we can't control inflation.
One of the goals once we get to the bid process and a GMP is to contract quickly. Mm-hmm. And for me to go out and contract with subcontractors quickly. So there's a lot of movement. There's potentially unlimited movement between now and that bid date. But if we do our job and we get contracted with our subcontractors and my company with the city, we're usually in pretty good shape. And I just proved this that I just finished Jewel High School gym and locker room. And it was a very similar setup, similar contingencies. There was a lot of fear in the community about cost escalating through the construction project, and we brought it in under budget and are returning some dollars back to the school. So that's my goal. My goal is to get it to contract, work with people that I trust, try to put that leverage back on them to say, hey, we've got a deal. Go out and buy your equipment right now. Let's get that stuff procured. Sometimes we've got to think about how we store it. But the moment we hit the site, if we do our job and we're all on the same page, once we get to contract date and a GMP, we're rolling. That's the hope.
You had one question, I think?
Yes. What would it take to study and acquire solar panels and the system to go on a building that's built, ready to take them, and it's not in the budget currently?
That's something we can certainly do in the process. What we'll do probably is work with our engineers to determine the size of the array that's appropriate. That might be based on the size of the roof we have, or it might be less than that, depending on the kind of energy consumption. We can do those kind of calculations and then we can put a number to it. So at least, and I anticipate we will do that at some point in this process, whether we're trying to pull something like that out of contingency or say, hey, we need an extra $250,000 and we can run this whole thing on solar. Does that go back to city council? Do we fundraise? I don't know. But I think we'll be able to quantify that during this process, along with kind of designing the ability to take it in the future.
Yeah, the beauty of a metal roof, for instance, which is kind of what's thought about now, is that if we do use a metal roof, they're very easy to retrofit into a solar system. The key is making sure that the structure underneath that metal roof is well designed and all the conduits are ready to go through the roof. And so that's what I think is really important, is that before we get to that point, we're ready to roll. But it seems like a no-brainer to be ready for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And figuring out how much power it takes to run the building so that you have enough room to support the solar that's enough for them to build.
Right, and we'll, like I said, we'll work with our mechanical engineers kind of early in this process to kind of help understand those parameters. And that'll either inform how we design the roof, or it'll inform how much of that roof gets covered. So that'll be part of our design.
Yeah, we're often going through some very critical decision points on what's a critical load versus non-critical load, and we separate those under an automatic transfer switch so that all that happens quite easily. You don't need every plug in a building to be operational. You need 25% of them and some good lighting, and make sure egress is covered and you have some heat in the building. So that's another part of the calculation.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The PUD doesn't have any grants for that. When I worked in Portland, there was what's it called?
Well, there's Energy Trust of Oregon.
Energy Trust. We're outside of it.
Oh, come on. I was going to look
So
at that.
ETO actually paid for the solar installation that we put into the Letting Library. We could only afford, based on that grant, a certain amount of arrays, but we did exactly what Chris said, and for very little cost, we're able to design the roof system and the conduit to expand that array. So that'll just be part of the dance. You know, we spend a lot of time together every week, and we'll be going back and forth, and that's where we'll start to negotiate that. And if it does end up that we're able to build the building for exactly what we bid it for, and we have our contingency, that'll be a decision for city council to make, to say, hey, we could add solar for another 200,000 or whatever it is. Do you want the GMP to reflect that? And so we can bring that option to them. But it is something that we can't study now, but we can study once we move into the next phase. And it lowers operational costs a lot. We measure it based on EUIs. I don't know what that stands for, but
Energy use.
the library I worked in.
Energy use index. Let's go with that.
Yeah. For the EUI for the library, we had a similar thing where we had a tear down versus new construction versus old. We were burning 150 or something EUIs, which people joked that we were like the apartment complex next door was plugged in to us. We ended up with a building when we included the solar arrays that had a 17. So it made an enormous difference, but biggest impact was the building envelope. So.
That we're going to do regardless,
And that we're going to do either way.
because we need to build it.
So, well, I think that's time. There's not any other questions.
I don't have a question, just a comment.
Sure.
Thank you very much for your
Yes.
excellent.
Everybody for participating. I did a public high school in Portland. And I had maybe 10 people show up regularly. And this has been regular attendance, and I've been blown away by that. So it's really nice to have that. It's nice to see your involvement.